She asked for directions to the lounge. A flight attendant shoved her aside. The cabin fell quiet. What no one knew yet was simple. Dr. Laila Monroe owned the airline beneath their feet. Who gets to look like they belong in seat 2A? What happens when courtesy becomes a gate and bias holds the key? If you were calm enough to swallow the insult, would you stay silent or speak so the whole plane could hear? When the cameras start rolling and the internet catches fire, who stands with you at 30,000 feet and who tries to bury you on the ground? How far would you go to turn one humiliation into a promise that dignity is standard equipment for everyone on board? From a quiet woman in a gray sweater to a leader willing to face down her own board. This is the story of a choice that changed an airline and challenged an industry. The route runs from Chicago to New York, but the real journey travels through memory, power, and conscience. If this hits a nerve, you are not alone. Like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you do not miss a single chapter. Buckle up, we begin. The cabin smelled faintly of fresh coffee and new leather. Dr. Laila Monroe shifted in her seat in 2A, stretching her legs before takeoff. She wasn't dressed like the head of a major airline. Faded gray sweater, soft jeans, comfortable sneakers, hair pulled back in a simple bun. She preferred it that way. Incognito travel let her see how her airline treated real passengers when no one knew the owner was on board. This morning's flight from Chicago to New York was a quiet one. A few business travelers murmured into their phones. A couple in matching tracksuits argued softly about seat assignments. Laila sipped her water, glancing at the forward galley. The first-class lounge area was only steps away, but she had never been to it mid-boarding. She wanted to see if the service there matched the promises in the glossy brochures. She rose, smoothing her sweater, and stepped into the aisle. A flight attendant stood near the galley counter, tapping at a tablet. Her name tag read Paige Kincaid, mid-40s, perfectly pressed uniform. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me," Laila said politely. "Could you point me to the lounge area?" Paige glanced up without moving her head. Her eyes flicked over Laila's outfit, her skin, then back to the tablet. "The lounge is for our premium passengers." "Ma'am." "I understand," Laila said. "I'm seated in 2A. Paige's lips curved not a friendly smile, more like a smirk. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" Before Laila could respond, a man in a tailored navy suit approached from behind. He held his boarding pass out like a VIP badge. "Hi, where's the lounge?" he asked. Paige's posture transformed instantly. Shoulders back, smile bright, voice warm. "Of course, sir. Let me show you." She stepped around Laila, but not just around. Her elbow pressed sharply into Laila's side, forcing her to stumble back a step. Laila steadied herself against the bulkhead. "That was unnecessary," she said calmly. Paige stopped, the warmth gone from her face. "You'll need to wait your turn." "I was already speaking to you," Laila said, her voice still measured. "And I'd appreciate not being pushed. I did not push you." Paige replied loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Please don't create a scene." The man in the suit looked uncomfortable. "I can wait," he said quietly. She was here first. Paige ignored him. Her gaze stayed fixed on Laila, cold and challenging. "If you have a problem, you can speak to the lead attendant." "I'd like that," Laila replied. Paige's laugh was short, dismissive. "Good luck with that." She turned to the intercom. "Lead, Can I get a security check at the forward galley disruptive passenger? Laila felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Not fear, not exactly. It was the familiar awareness of risk. As a black woman, she knew what that label disruptive could trigger, even when she had done nothing wrong. Passengers in nearby seats shifted uncomfortably. Some pulled out their phones. Laila caught the eye of an older black gentleman across the aisle. He gave her a small, knowing nod. 2 minutes later, the lead flight attendant arrived. Tall, sandy-haired, name tag reading Dane Ellsworth. He looked from Paige to Laila, expression neutral. "What's the issue?" Dane asked. This passenger became aggressive when I informed her the lounge was for premium guests, Paige said, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. Laila inhaled slowly. "I'm in seat 2A, she said. I asked for directions to the lounge. She gave them to the passenger behind me and pushed me aside. Dane's gaze moved between them. "Do you have your boarding pass?" Laila handed it over without hesitation. He scanned it. First class. Confirmed. Paige's jaw tightened. She still doesn't need to be in the lounge before departure. "That's not the policy," Dane said gently, handing the pass back to Laila. Then, "To Paige, I'll handle it." The tension in the galley was thick enough to taste. Paige's eyes darted to the passengers still watching. She forced a smile, muttered something about pre-departure checks, and moved toward the rear. Dane lowered his voice. "I'm sorry about that. Ma'am, you're welcome in the lounge area." Laila hesitated. Part of her wanted to settle in, let the incident slide, but that would mean letting Paige's behavior vanish into the background noise of travel. Another invisible cut in a lifetime of them. She shook her head. "I'll stay in my seat. Back in 2A. She buckled in as the safety demo began. Outwardly, she was composed. Inwardly, her thoughts moved in two directions at once. One voice, the pragmatic one, reminded her that patience was power, that staying quiet for now would give her a clearer view of the crew's natural behavior. The other voice, sharper, harder, asked why she should tolerate disrespect in her own house. She owned this aircraft as surely as the ground it would land on. The engines roared to life. Laila closed her eyes, feeling the vibration through the seat frame. There was a long flight ahead, time enough to decide how to respond, time enough to choose between quiet observation and decisive action. Outside the window, Chicago's skyline slid away beneath the clouds. Inside, the air was thick with the kind of tension most passengers would forget by landing. But for Laila Monroe, nothing about this morning would be forgotten. The hum of the engines had settled into a steady rhythm. Passengers adjusted their headrests, pulled out tablets, opened newspapers, in 2A. Laila sat upright, hands folded in her lap. Her reflection in the darkened window looked calm. Inside, her thoughts were far from still. Moments like this always took her somewhere else. Back to Detroit. Back to a 2-bedroom apartment where the sound of planes overhead was the soundtrack of her childhood. Back to the kitchen table where her mother, Evelyn, would sit late into the night, her nursing shoes kicked off, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "Study hard," her mother would say, pouring herself a mug of tea she could barely keep from spilling. "If you want to be in the sky, you better learn how to build the wings." Laila had taken those words as scripture. She devoured science books from the public library, memorized every diagram in her worn copy of Basic Aerodynamics. Her friends wanted to be singers, basketball stars, movie actors. Laila wanted to design the machines that defied gravity. The first barrier came early. Her high school guidance counselor looked at her application for the state's engineering program and asked if she had considered something more realistic. She remembered the way he smiled as if he were saving her from disappointment. She remembered deciding she would prove him wrong. Howard University took a chance on her. A full scholarship. She had stepped onto that campus certain that talent and hard work would be enough. It was there she learned about the other currency in America: connections, familiar faces, assumptions. In her sophomore year, she lost a coveted internship to a classmate who had a family friend on the selection committee. When she confronted him, he laughed and said, "That's just how the world works." By the time she graduated top of her class in aerospace engineering, she understood the game. She just refused to play it by their rules. Her first job interview was at a Legacy Airlines research division. She walked into the glass tower lobby in her best suit, portfolio in hand. The hiring manager scanned her resume, raised an eyebrow, and asked, "Did you really do all this work yourself?" It was not curiosity. It was disbelief. She got the job. She kept her head down, delivered more than anyone asked, and watched as promotions went to men with half her record. She developed new composite materials that made aircraft lighter and more fuel efficient. She saw her ideas presented in meetings without her name attached. She told herself she could endure it long enough to reach a place where she could change it. That place came sooner than expected, when her grandmother passed away. The modest inheritance was enough to take a risk. Laila left the corporate track and started Monroe Aeronautics, a consulting firm that promised airlines one thing: lower costs through smarter engineering. For 5 years, she worked out of a cramped office over a dry cleaner, chasing contracts, building a reputation. Sometimes the clients never knew the woman behind the innovation was black. Sometimes they knew and made sure their competitors did not find out. Her break came when she heard Apex Meridian Air was collapsing. The regional carrier was hemorrhaging money, its stock circling the drain. Investors were circling too, eager to carve it up for parts. Laila saw something else, a chance to not just fix airplanes, but to fix an airline. She moved fast, leveraged every relationship she had, called in favors, brought in silent partners who believed in her vision. When the dust cleared, she owned 51% of Apex Meridian. The headlines were brutal. Unknown engineer buys doomed airline, industry suicide, but she had not bought it to win their approval. She brought in her proprietary fuel systems, reworked the route maps to serve communities the big carriers ignored, changed hiring practices to bring in talent from outside the same old networks. The numbers began to climb, profits returned, employee satisfaction improved, customer complaints dropped. Through it all, she stayed out of the spotlight. Publicly, the CEO was still the previous figurehead. She served as Chief Innovation Officer, letting the culture evolve without employees performing for the boss. She rode an economy as often as first class. She walked terminals unrecognized. She wanted the truth, not the staged version. And now, in the forward galley of one of her own jets, a flight attendant had looked her up and down and decided she did not belong. She glanced toward the curtain separating first class from the rest of the cabin. Paige was there, speaking to another attendant, her smile easy and animated. Laila could almost believe the push had been a misunderstanding. Almost believe the words "Are you sure we're harmless?" But she had spent too many years cataloging the small cuts, the paper-thin dismissals, the way respect was rationed according to the shape of your face or the shade of your skin. She thought of the training modules she had approved. How many of them actually addressed bias head-on? How many supervisors looked the other way because confrontation was uncomfortable? How many passengers had walked off her planes feeling smaller than when they boarded? And how many of those stories would never reach her desk? Her phone vibrated in her sweater pocket. A message from Tessa Jordan, her assistant. Board call at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Gerard already asked for agenda change. Possible investor concerns. Gerard Halverson, her chief operating officer, was a master at dressing resistance in the language of caution. Whenever she proposed a new equity policy, he asked about cost implications. When she pushed for diverse hiring at the executive level, he suggested we focus on qualifications. He smiled while he said it, as though they were on the same team. The message was a reminder. Today's incident was not just about one employee. It was about whether the culture she had been building was real or just a story they told themselves. She slid the phone back into her pocket and rested her head against the seat. The intercom crackled. The captain's voice was warm, almost casual. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting a smooth ride into New York. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." Laila closed her eyes. She would enjoy the flight in her own way, watching, listening, noticing who got refills before they asked, and who had to wave twice to get a drink, noticing who got called sir and ma'am and who got hey or nothing at all. She was not ready to act, not yet, but the choice was coming. She could feel it in the tension of her jaw, in the steady rhythm of the engines. She could hear her mother's voice again, the one that told her to learn how to build the wings. In the quiet above the clouds, she was building something else, a case, a reckoning, a decision that, once made, would not be undone. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Paige moved down the aisle with a tray of champagne flutes, her smile dazzling for some, muted for others. Laila watched every interaction, the details lodging in her mind like rivets in a wing. She was the owner of Apex Meridian Air, but right now she was its most attentive passenger. The hum of the engines was steady. Outside the windows, a blanket of white clouds stretched to the horizon. Inside, the mood in first class had softened into the quiet rhythms of a mid-morning flight. Passengers typed on laptops, flipped through magazines, or simply leaned back with eyes closed. Laila sat still in 2A, but her attention was anything but idle. Every move in the cabin caught her eye. Paige poured champagne for the man in the navy suit, the same one she had warmly greeted earlier. He laughed at something she said, his posture relaxed. A moment later, she approached a woman across the aisle, handed her a glass with a polite nod, and moved on without a word. No smile, no warmth, patterns. That was what Laila was watching for now. In her mind, patterns told the real story of bias. One slight could be explained away, but a pattern was harder to deny. Paige's tray was half empty when she reached Laila's row. She paused, her professional smile tight. "Would you care for something to drink?" she asked. "Water, please," Laila said. Paige nodded, placed the water on Laila's tray table, and moved on without another word. No mention of snacks. No enjoy your flight. It was subtle. So subtle that anyone who wanted to could pretend it meant nothing. But Laila knew better. She had lived her life among these shades of dismissal. She sipped the water slowly. across the aisle. The older black gentleman she had noticed earlier caught her gaze again. He raised his eyebrows as if to ask, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" She gave the smallest nod in return. 20 minutes passed. The cabin was calm, the steady hiss of air conditioning the only sound. Then Paige's voice broke the quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, just a reminder that the lounge area is currently closed for pre-landing preparations. We appreciate your cooperation." Laila frowned. Pre-landing preparations. They were still an hour from arrival. It was an odd announcement, and her instincts told her it was pointed. A few minutes later, Paige returned to the front galley. She was speaking in a low voice to another attendant, a younger woman with wide eyes who glanced toward Laila and then quickly looked away. The younger attendant disappeared into the cockpit. Moments later, the first officer's voice came over the intercom. If Ms. Laila Monroe could please remain in her seat after landing. A member of the crew will speak with you before deplaning. Conversations in first class died instantly. Heads turned. Laila felt every pair of eyes on her. The older gentleman across the aisle shifted in his seat, frowning. The man in the navy suit looked puzzled. Laila sat back, her expression unreadable. She felt the tension in her shoulders, the old instinct to defend herself before accusations took root. But she did nothing. Not yet. She could feel Paige's satisfaction from across the galley. When the younger attendant returned from the cockpit, she avoided meeting Laila's eyes. Paige leaned toward her and said something with a quick smile. The younger woman did not smile back. Laila glanced toward the curtain at the back of first class. Dane Ellsworth, the first officer acting as lead attendant earlier, stepped quietly into the galley. He spoke to Paige in a tone too low for Laila to hear. Paige responded with a shrug, then gestured toward Laila. Dane hesitated before approaching 2A. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I just want to let you know that after we land, airport security will be meeting the aircraft." Laila's eyebrows lifted slightly. "For what reason, I'm told there was an incident before takeoff," Dane said. "I wasn't present, so I can't speak to the details, but I'd recommend staying calm and letting them speak to you." Laila studied his face. He didn't look hostile. If anything, he looked uneasy. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded and stepped away. Her mind was already turning. A meeting with airport security could escalate quickly if handled poorly. She thought about the passengers watching her, about the inevitable cell phone videos. She could already imagine the online headlines, "Disruptive passenger escorted off first class." But she also thought about something her mother used to say when people underestimated her. Let them think they're winning until it's time to remind them whose game they're playing. She glanced out the window. The clouds had thinned, revealing the coastline far below. The sunlight caught the wings at just the right angle, the metal gleaming like a promise. When Paige returned to collect glasses, she barely glanced at Laila, but the corners of her mouth twitched upward, just enough for Laila to see. A small, satisfied smirk. That was the moment Laila decided. She would not let this end in a quiet conversation in some back room. She would not allow her dignity to be debated behind closed doors. She would not let this incident vanish into corporate reports that said no further action required. She thought about the complaint record she had seen over the years. Passengers of color flagged for security review over seat disputes, gate agents accused of aggressive behavior when they simply asked questions, cabin crew calling security before trying to resolve a misunderstanding. If this could happen to her, The owner of the airline. What was happening to the people without her power? The seatbelt sign chimed on. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their descent into New York. Laila's pulse was steady now. Her decision was made. As the plane began its slow drop through the clouds, she could feel the anticipation around her. Some passengers avoided looking at her, others watched openly, curiosity in their eyes. Paige moved briskly through the cabin, checking seat belts and overhead bins. When she reached 2A, she paused. "We'll be on the ground shortly." "Ms. Monroe," she said, her tone professional but her eyes still sharp. "I know," Laila replied, meeting her gaze without blinking. The plane touched down with a soft bump, the engines reversing with a deep roar. As they taxied toward the gate, Laila sat tall, hands resting lightly on her knees. When the seatbelt sign went off, passengers stood, pulling bags from overhead bins. Laila remained seated. She heard the click of the cockpit door opening. Dane stepped out, his face composed. 2 uniformed security officers were visible through the jet bridge window, waiting just outside the door. Paige was already speaking to them as she stepped onto the bridge. Her voice carried back into the cabin. "She's in 2A." Laila rose smoothly. She adjusted her sweater, picked up her leather carry-on, and stepped into the aisle. The older gentleman across from her gave her a small nod of encouragement. In the doorway, the security officers straightened. One of them glanced at the leather wallet in her hand as she reached inside. Laila pulled out a slim black card, handed it to him, and said evenly, "Before you take another step, you might want to know whose aircraft you just boarded." The officer looked down. His eyes widened. He looked back up at her. "Ma'am, is this real?" "It's as real as the wings on this plane," Laila said. Paige froze mid-step, her head turning slowly. The smirk was gone. Laila stepped forward into the jet bridge. The next move would be hers. The air in the jet bridge felt cooler than the cabin. The faint hum of the aircraft's engines was replaced by the distant chatter of gate announcements and rolling suitcases. The 2 security officers stood still, eyes fixed on the black card in the taller officer's hand. It was embossed with the Apex Meridian Air crest. Beneath it the words Chief Executive Officer, Owner. The taller officer looked up at Laila. His voice was careful now. "Ma'am, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." Laila's gaze didn't waver. "The misunderstanding began before we left the ground," she said evenly, "and it grew at 35,000 feet. Behind her." Passengers hesitated in the doorway. The older gentleman from 2B lingered in the aisle, watching. Paige hovered just inside the cabin, her posture stiff. The shorter officer shifted uncomfortably. "Would you like to step aside and discuss this privately?" "No," Laila said. "If this had been any other passenger, you would not have offered that courtesy. You would have escorted them away in front of everyone. Let us keep the conditions equal." The taller officer glanced toward the gate, where a few curious onlookers had stopped to see what was happening. "As you wish, ma'am." Laila turned slightly so her voice would carry back into the cabin. "First Officer Ellsworth, could you join us?" Dane appeared in the doorway. "Yes, ma'am." "You were present when this began," Laila said. "I'd like you to confirm to these officers what you saw." Dane looked from her to Paige, then back. "I saw a disagreement about lounge access before departure. I verified Dr. Monroe's boarding pass for first class. I didn't see any disruptive behavior." The taller officer nodded. "Noted. Dr. Monroe, do you wish to make a statement now?" "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady, clear. "This morning, while boarding my own aircraft, I was treated as though I did not belong in the seat I purchased. When I questioned that treatment, I was labeled disruptive. That label could have justified removing me from this flight. It could have followed me into official records. I will not allow this pattern to continue." Her words hung in the air. Passengers inside the cabin were still. Paige's eyes darted toward the gate. "I will be filing a formal report," Laila continued, "and I will expect to see the internal security footage preserved in full." The taller officer straightened. "Understood, ma'am. We will ensure it is secured." Laila gave a small nod. "Thank you. Now I will be deplaning." She stepped past the officers and into the terminal. Conversations rose around her, but she did not slow. Every movement was measured, deliberate. At the gate counter, the agent looked startled. "Oh, Dr. Monroe, I didn't realize you were not expected to," Laila said gently. "But please, Page Operations, tell them the CEO requires a private conference room immediately." "Yes, ma'am," the agent said, already reaching for the phone. The conference room was down a quiet corridor. A rectangular table, a wall-mounted monitor, the faint scent of coffee that had been brewing since morning. Laila set her bag on the table and opened her laptop. Within minutes, Tessa Jordan appeared on the monitor. "I just got your message," Tessa said, her expression tense. "What happened? An incident on board," Laila replied. "Senior crew, targeted behavior, security involvement. All before the seatbelt sign went off after landing." Tessa's eyes narrowed. "Do you want me to start the internal review?" "Yes, and I want every complaint involving that crew member for the past 5 years pulled by midnight." "Understood," Tessa said. "Do you want me to alert Gerard?" Laila's lips pressed into a thin line. "No, not yet. He will hear when I'm ready for him to hear." Tessa nodded once. "I'll get moving." The screen went dark. Laila leaned back in the chair. She thought about the faces of the passengers still on board. The man in the suit who had deferred to her in the galley, the older gentleman's quiet nod of solidarity, the younger attendant who looked like she wanted to speak but didn't. This was more than one confrontation. It was a living example of why she had taken control of this airline in the first place. The surface looked polished. The culture underneath was still fighting change. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "We should talk. I was on your flight. I saw everything." She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Name." The reply came almost immediately. "David Carter, 14C, former FAA compliance investigator." Her mind clicked through possibilities. A potential ally, a witness with expertise, or someone fishing for influence. She replied, "I'll meet you in the Concourse Cafe in 10 minutes. When she arrived, David was already seated at a corner table. Early 60s, silver hair, calm eyes. He stood as she approached. "Dr. Monroe," he said quietly, shaking her hand. "I retired last year, but I know the rules these crews are supposed to follow. What happened to you was a textbook misuse of security protocols. If it can happen to you, it can happen to anyone." "I know," Laila said, taking a seat. "That's why it will not end here." David leaned in slightly. "If you want, I can help. I still have contacts in the FAA's ethics office. They would be very interested in a case like this." Laila considered him for a moment. "I appreciate the offer. For now, I will handle this internally, but I may call you." He nodded. "Then I'll leave you to it. Just know, you're not the only one who's been waiting for someone to push back." After he left, Laila sat for a moment longer, letting the hum of the cafe fill the space around her. She thought about the next steps, the security footage, the complaint history, the conversation she would eventually have with Gerard Halverson, who would no doubt frame this as a PR risk to be minimized. But she was not interested in minimizing. She was interested in revealing. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Tessa. "You'll want to see this." The message read. Attached was a short video. Laila pressed play. It was footage from a passenger's phone, already uploaded to social media. The caption read, "When the CEO is treated like she doesn't belong on her own airline." The clip showed Paige stepping into her path, the push, the dismissive smirk, then the moment in the jet bridge when Laila handed her card to the security officer. She watched it twice. The comments below were multiplying by the minute. Some were angry, some were shocked. Some shared their own stories of being treated like they didn't belong in first class. The fire had already started. Laila closed the video. She could feel the weight of her next move pressing in. This was no longer just her experience. It was already becoming a symbol, and symbols had the power to move more than aircraft. They could move people. By the time Laila reached the black sedan waiting outside Terminal C, her phone was buzzing nonstop. She slid into the back seat, nodded at the driver, and pulled the door shut behind her. The engine started. The hum of traffic on the airport road filled the silence as she unlocked her phone. Tessa's messages were coming fast. Clip has 2.1 million views. Trending hashtag is "She owns the airline." Another message: "Several passengers from your flight are adding their own stories. Some are tagging major news outlets." Laila scrolled. A young woman had posted about a similar incident last year with the same crew member. An older man had shared how he was once questioned 3 times about his ticket while boarding first class. Every post was picking up speed, amplified by strangers who saw themselves in the humiliation. She opened her email. Reporters were already requesting comment. A message from her legal counsel blinked at the top of the inbox. Subject line urgent. Crisis protocol. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Rough day. Ms. Monroe productive," she replied without looking up. Traffic slowed as they entered the city. She leaned back in her seat, phone in hand, mind moving faster than the sedan. This was a public moment now. If she let it play out without her voice, the narrative would be written for her. Her first call was to Tessa. Pull the crew rosters for every flight Paige Kincaid has worked in the last 3 years. Cross-reference with all passenger complaints involving bias or seating disputes. "Already started," Tessa said. "And Gerard called me. He's seen the video." Layla's voice stayed calm. "What did he say? That we should issue a brief statement and let it fade?" His words were, "Don't add fuel to it." Laila closed her eyes for a moment. "Set a board meeting for tomorrow morning. I want full attendance, including the investor reps." "You think Gerard's going to fight you on this?" Tessa asked. "I think he already has a plan," Laila replied, "and it's not mine." By the time she arrived at her apartment, the city outside was slipping into evening. The skyline glowed in the soft orange of sunset. She walked through the quiet, minimalist space and set her bag on the counter. The television in the living room was muted, but the screen was filled with her own image, a freeze frame from the jet bridge footage. She could read the closed captions. Unconfirmed report suggests the woman in the video is the CEO of Apex Meridian Air. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but instinct told her to answer. Dr. Monroe. The voice was male, smooth but alert. This is Alan Rodriguez with Horizon News Network. I know you don't do interviews often, but your perspective could define this story before it spins away from you. I'm not ready to give a statement, Laila said. That's exactly why I called, he replied. Right now, people are telling it for you. If you wait too long, they'll believe their version. She ended the call politely but firmly. This wasn't the time to explain. This was the time to act. She opened her laptop, logging into the secure internal portal of Apex Meridian Air. Every executive-level communication, every policy draft, every crew report all at her fingertips. She typed Paige Kincaid's name into the personnel search. 32 entries appeared. Work schedules, training completions, commendations, and buried among them. 6 internal notes marked informal passenger complaint, no action taken. All 6 mentioned confrontations over seating, 5 involving passengers of color. She stared at the screen. A pattern, again, documented, ignored. Her mind went back to the boardroom, to Gerard leaning back in his chair, smoothing his tie, telling her that crew morale was too fragile for aggressive oversight, that isolated incidents didn't justify systemic changes. She could see now how much of that had been about keeping the old ways intact. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a video call from Dane Ellsworth, the first officer from the flight. "Ma'am," he said when she answered, his voice low, "I know I'm not supposed to contact you directly, but I thought you should know. A few of us in the crew are willing to speak up. What happened wasn't just what you saw. There were comments before boarding, ones you didn't hear." "Comments?" Laila asked. "Yes," Dane said. "Paige told another attendant she didn't trust certain passengers in first class because they didn't look the part. She was talking about you and the gentleman in 2B. The words landed heavy, but unsurprising. "Would you repeat that in front of the board?" Laila asked. Dane hesitated. "If it comes to that, yes. I can't watch things like that and pretend it's normal." "Thank you. Mr. Ellsworth," she said, "you've done the right thing." When the call ended, she stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker on. Below, people moved through the streets, unaware that tomorrow's board meeting could reshape an airline. Her phone buzzed once more. This time it was a message from David Carter, the former FAA investigator. "Just so you know, the FAA already flagged your flight. They monitor social media spikes involving airlines. You'll have an inquiry within 48 hours. Laila typed back, "Good. Let them look closely." She returned to her desk and began drafting 2 documents. The first was a formal internal incident report, addressed to the board and legal team, outlining the sequence of events with timestamps and references to supporting footage. The second was a draft of a public statement. She chose her words carefully. She would not make it about herself alone. She would make it about every passenger who had been made to feel they didn't belong, about the responsibility of airlines to uphold dignity as much as safety, about what Apex Meridian Air would do differently. By the time the statement was complete, the clock read past midnight. She saved it but did not send it. Timing would be everything. She closed her laptop, poured a glass of water, and sat in the dim light of her living room. The hum of the city below was a reminder this was bigger than her. The clip had tapped into something deep, something raw. She could feel it in the messages flooding her inbox. Tomorrow, the board would see the footage. They would hear from witnesses. They would feel the weight of public outrage. And when the moment came, she would decide whether Apex Meridian Air would simply survive this storm or be transformed by it. The next morning, the glass-walled boardroom on the 36th floor buzzed with low voices. A long mahogany table stretched toward the skyline, each chair occupied by someone who controlled a piece of Apex Meridian Air. Investor representatives, senior executives, legal counsel, and, at the head of the table, an empty chair waiting for Laila Monroe. Gerard Halverson sat near the center, leaning back with his usual air of ownership, though the CEO's seat was not his. He was speaking to Marjorie Hale, the lead investor rep, his voice pitched low enough to sound confidential. The doors opened. Laila walked in without hurry, carrying a slim leather folder. She wore a deep navy suit, her posture straight, her expression calm. The room quieted. "Good morning," she said simply, moving to her chair. She placed the folder on the table, sat, and let the silence linger just long enough to signal that this meeting would proceed on her terms. "Before we begin," Gerard started, "I want to remind everyone that we're here to discuss a single personnel incident and its potential PR impact. We should be careful not to overreact." Laila met his gaze. "It is not a single incident. It is a reflection of a pattern within our company's culture, and we will treat it as such." Gerard's mouth tightened. "With respect, this could damage crew morale if we turn it into a witch hunt. The public's attention span is short. If we wait, this will fade." Laila opened the folder and slid a printed page toward the center of the table. "This is the trending data from last night. The video has surpassed 6 million views across platforms. Thousands of people are sharing their own stories. Many name Apex Meridian Air directly. This is not fading. This is growing." Marjorie Hale leaned forward. "Do we have confirmation that the video is authentic?" "It is authentic," Laila said. "It is me, on my own airline, being told I did not belong in my assigned seat, then pushed aside when I asked for assistance. When I objected, the crew escalated to security protocol without cause. That is on record." One of the legal counsels shifted uncomfortably. "CEO Monroe, for the record, have you filed your own internal report?" "Yes," she said. "And I have requested the security footage from both the gate and the cabin. If anyone in this room attempts to interfere with that request, I will consider it obstruction of a formal investigation." Gerard's voice sharpened. "You're implying someone here would obstruct. I am stating that it will not be tolerated." Laila replied. The quiet in the room felt like a held breath. She reached into the folder again and pulled out another sheet. "This is a list of passenger complaints over the last 5 years involving the crew member in question, Paige Kincaid. 6 separate incidents with strikingly similar language disputes over seating assignments. Passengers described as out of place or making others uncomfortable. In 5 of those cases, the passengers were people of color. None resulted in disciplinary action." Gerard shifted in his seat. "Those were reviewed at the time. Inconclusive. Inconclusive is not the same as unfounded." Laila said, "Inconclusive means the will to pursue the truth was absent." Marjorie glanced at Gerard, then back to Laila. What do you propose a full audit of passenger complaint handling over the past 10 years? Laila said. A mandatory retraining program on bias recognition for all crew, and immediate administrative leave for Ms. Kincaid pending the outcome of the investigation. Gerard shook his head. That will cause a backlash among the crews. They'll see it as us taking the word of social media over their own. Layla's voice stayed calm, but her eyes sharpened. If crews believe that holding them accountable is betrayal, then we have failed in shaping the culture. Accountability is not betrayal. It is the only way to maintain trust with the public we serve. An investor named Victor Lang cleared his throat. If we move this aggressively, will it not open us to lawsuits from the employee less risk than ignoring it? Laila said, the public record is already forming without our input. If we lag behind, we'll be reacting instead of leading. And leaders who fail to act in moments like this lose more than lawsuits. They lose legitimacy. From the far end of the table, Beatrice Quinn, a board ally, spoke for the first time. I agree with the CEO. This is bigger than a single crew member. It's about the kind of airline we claim to be. Gerard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Laila looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. I own this airline, but ownership is not enough. Stewardship requires action, even when it is uncomfortable, especially when it is uncomfortable. She paused. I will give each of you 24 hours to review the materials. At tomorrow's follow-up, we will vote on the audit and the retraining program. Until then, I expect full cooperation in securing all related footage, statements, and records. Any deviation from that will be treated as a breach of fiduciary duty. Silence again. Then Marjorie nodded slowly. Understood. Laila closed her folder and rose. Meeting adjourned. As she walked toward the door, Gerard's voice followed her. Laila, a word. She stopped, turned slightly. He approached, lowering his voice. You're making this personal. It is personal, she said. It's personal to every passenger who has been treated as though they do not belong. If you can't see that, perhaps you're in the wrong room. She left without waiting for his reply. Outside, Tessa was waiting in the hallway, a tablet in her hands. We've had another surge, the clips on the front page of 3 major news sites. Laila nodded. Schedule interviews. I'll speak on record, but I will not comment until after tomorrow's vote. Tessa's eyes widened slightly. You're going public. Yes, Laila said. And when I do, we'll control the narrative, not Gerard, not the rumor mill, not anyone else. They stepped into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, Layla's reflection in the polished metal looked back at her. Calm, steady, but beneath the surface, the current was moving fast. She knew the next 24 hours would define the outcome. Either the board would side with her and take real action, or they would try to protect the old guard. If they chose the latter, she was prepared for that too. After all, ownership had its privileges, and she had not survived years of battles in business to lose to her own employees. When the elevator reached the ground floor, she stepped out into the lobby's bright morning light. The air outside carried the city's noise and movement. Somewhere above the hum, she thought she could hear the sound of an aircraft climbing into the sky. It was a reminder of what was at stake, not just planes and schedules, but the people inside them. By late afternoon, the city's skyline was framed by low clouds and a soft gray light. In the top-floor media suite of Apex Meridian Air's headquarters, technicians adjusted microphones and tested camera angles. The space was deliberately intimate, a dark walnut table, a pair of leather chairs angled toward each other, warm lighting designed to soften the edges. Laila stood near the window, looking out at the view. She could see the traffic moving slowly along the expressway, the faint glint of an incoming aircraft as it descended toward the airport. Her reflection in the glass was calm, composed, but her mind was turning over every word she would say. Tessa stepped in quietly, carrying a tablet. "The news anchor is here, Alan Rodriguez. He brought a skeleton crew, just like you asked. No live feed. It will air tonight at 9. Laila nodded. "Good. Let's make sure this is the only recording that leaves this room until then." Alan entered a moment later, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and that same alert expression he'd had on the phone. "Dr. Monroe, thank you for agreeing to this. I know you prefer to stay behind the scenes. This is not about me," Laila said. "It is about the experience every passenger should have, and too many have been denied." They took their seats. The camera light blinked red, and the room fell into a hush. Alan leaned forward. "Dr. Monroe, the public has seen a short video clip of you being confronted by a flight attendant on your own airline. Can you tell us, in your own words, what happened?" Laila's voice was even deliberate. "On that flight, I was approached and treated as though I did not belong in my assigned seat. When I asked for assistance, I was physically moved aside. When I questioned that action, security was called, not because I was a threat, but because I refused to accept unjust treatment quietly. This was not the first time such behavior has been reported within our company, but it will be the last time it goes unanswered." Alan nodded slightly. "Some people would say this was an isolated incident. I say it is a symptom," Laila replied, "and symptoms point to deeper conditions. When passengers are evaluated not on their boarding pass, but on assumptions about who they are or what they look like. That is not customer service. That is bias. And in the business of transporting human beings safely, there is no room for bias." The interview continued. She spoke of the need for dignity, for transparent accountability, for ensuring that safety and respect were treated as equally essential. Alan listened carefully, guiding her with minimal interruptions. When the cameras powered down, he exhaled softly. "That was powerful. You do realize this will put even more pressure on your board. I'm counting on it," Laila said. Tessa re-entered as Alan left with his crew. "You have calls from 3 major civil rights organizations asking if you'd consider partnering on a public statement. And Gerard wants to see you." Laila's expression didn't change. "Tell him I'm unavailable until after the board vote tomorrow." That night, the interview aired. The network played the original clip, first the push in the jet bridge, the quiet handover of the black card, the security officers standing still. Then Alan's voice introduced her full statement. Across social media, reactions poured in, hashtags multiplied, passengers posted their own stories again, but this time they tagged the company's official account and included the words, "We stand with Laila," in a quiet apartment across town. Gerard watched the segment from his couch. The flicker of the television lit his face, jaw tight. He reached for his phone and sent a message to an internal group chat of senior managers. "We need to be ready to counter tomorrow. She's making this about a cultural war. We can't let her drag us all down for one employee's mistake." Back at Laila's home, her phone was lighting up nonstop. Tessa was on a conference call in the next room. coordinating with legal, public relations, and her own network of contacts. The interview had hit harder and faster than even Laila expected. Still, she sat alone for a moment in her study, sipping tea, letting the warmth settle her. She knew Gerard would move against her. It was his nature protect the old systems, protect himself. Her thoughts drifted briefly to Dane Ellsworth, the first officer who had offered to testify. He would be stepping into danger by doing so. The crew culture could turn on him quickly. That risk was not lost on her. She made a note to herself, protect the truth tellers. Her phone buzzed with a message from David Carter, the former FAA investigator. Your interview just triggered a spike in FAA media monitoring. Expect the call sooner than 48 hours. She typed back, let them call. I'll answer. In the quiet, she reflected on the day. The boardroom tension, the interview, the tidal wave of public reaction. Each piece was building toward tomorrow. And tomorrow was not just about one vote. It was about whether Apex Meridian Air could become what she had always envisioned, an airline where every seat carried equal dignity. Outside, rain began tapping lightly against the windows. The city lights blurred in the wet glass, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine a future where the changes she was pushing for were no longer controversial, where her presence in first class would be as unremarkable as anyone else's. She set down the tea and returned to her desk. Tomorrow's agenda was already open on her screen. She reviewed her talking points, sharpened a few sentences, and removed anything that sounded defensive. She was not defending herself. She was leading. Midway through the night, another message came from Tessa. Leaked memo. Gerard is rallying votes against the audit. He's telling them you're risking shareholder value. Laila read the words twice, then replied, let him gather his votes. I'll gather the truth. She turned off the screen, letting the room go dark except for the faint glow of the city outside. In the stillness, she felt the familiar mix of fatigue and resolve. Tomorrow, the old guard would push back hard, but she had been underestimated before, and it had never ended well for those who did. Morning sunlight streamed into the boardroom, bouncing off polished glass and steel. The atmosphere was sharper than the day before. A small crowd of assistants and legal staff stood against the back wall, taking notes. Every seat at the table was filled, and at the head. Laila Monroe sat with her leather folder closed in front of her, hands resting lightly on the cover. Gerard Halverson was already talking when she walked in minutes earlier, trying to frame the conversation before it began. Now, as the official start time approached, he leaned forward, his voice measured but tense. We have a decision to make, he said. Do we act in haste, risking our investor confidence, or do we allow the incident to be handled through standard HR protocols? I believe the latter is the reasonable choice. Several heads nodded along the table. Laila watched them carefully, recognizing those who often sided with Gerard out of habit, not conviction. Marjorie Hale, the lead investor representative, cleared her throat. Before we proceed to a vote, I believe CEO Monroe has prepared a statement. Laila rose, the quiet in the room drawing in like a tide. Yesterday, I spoke with the public because they deserve to know what kind of company carries them through the air. Today, I speak with you because you hold the power to shape that company's future. She opened the folder and placed a thin stack of papers in the center of the table. These are passenger complaints from the last 5 years involving the same crew member. 6 cases, all ignored. Patterns like this are not accidents. They are the result of a culture that allows bias to breathe unchecked. Gerard leaned back, his arms crossed. Those cases were inconclusive, none proven. Laila met his eyes. Nothing can be proven if no one looks closely enough. She gestured toward the door. I have asked someone to join us today, a witness who was present on the flight in question. The door opened. Dane Ellsworth, the first officer from that flight, stepped in wearing his crisp uniform. His posture was straight, but there was a tightness around his eyes. Gerard's expression hardened. This is irregular. This is an internal executive meeting, not a hearing. Marjorie lifted a hand. Let him speak. Dane took a breath. Before boarding, I overheard Ms. Kincaid say to another attendant that she did not trust certain passengers in first class because they didn't look the part. She was referring to Dr. Monroe and the gentleman in 2B. I saw her initiate the confrontation. I saw her push Dr. Monroe aside. There was no operational reason for her actions. The room was utterly still. Laila let the silence work, then spoke softly. That is the culture we have allowed to grow, a culture where appearance and prejudice can dictate treatment more than policy or humanity. If we ignore this, we endorse it. An investor near the end of the table shifted uncomfortably. What do you propose exactly? A full audit of complaint handling for the past 10 years. Mandatory bias recognition and de-escalation training for all crew. Administrative leave for Ms. Kincaid pending the audit's results. Laila replied. Gerard straightened. And if the vote fails, Laila's gaze didn't waver, then I will take every step necessary to protect this airline's integrity, with or without your support, including leveraging my ownership to restructure leadership. There was a murmur at the table. Everyone knew what that meant. Marjorie glanced around. Let's put it to a vote. One by one, hands went up. The first few were hesitant, looking at each other for reassurance. Then Beatrice Quinn raised hers with calm certainty, breaking the hesitation. 2 more followed, then another. When the count was taken, the numbers were clear a majority in favor of the audit and training. Gerard's jaw tightened, but he masked it quickly. Very well. The motion passes. Laila inclined her head. Thank you. I expect immediate coordination between HR, legal, and operations to implement the changes. Dane, you will be protected as a witness in this matter. Dane nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. Thank you, ma'am. As he left, Laila gathered her papers. She had won the vote, but she knew Gerard would not simply step aside. His influence ran deep, and he would look for ways to undermine the implementation. Marjorie lingered as the others filed out. You realize this is just the first battle. I do, Laila said, and I plan to win the war. Back in her office, she looked out over the city. The air outside shimmered with heat, and in the distance, a plane climbed into the sky. She thought about every passenger inside, each with their own story, each expecting to be treated as more than a seat number. Her phone rang. Tessa's voice came through. The FAA just called. They want an official meeting to discuss the incident and your public statements. They're sending a formal notice this afternoon. Laila smiled faintly. Good. It's time the regulators looked at more than just safety checklists. She hung up, feeling the shift in momentum. For the first time in days, the weight on her chest eased slightly. The truth had entered the record. The board had taken its first real step toward change. Still, she knew the road ahead would be anything but smooth. Gerard would regroup, the press would keep pressing, and the FAA's involvement would add a new layer of scrutiny. But as she closed her eyes for a moment, she felt the calm of knowing she had not stepped aside. She had stood in the center of the storm and moved the wind in her favor. The following afternoon, the 30th floor conference suite was quieter than usual. The heavy blinds were drawn halfway, muting the afternoon light into a subdued gray. A long, rectangular table dominated the room, with small microphones placed evenly along its length. Laila Monroe sat at one end, her hands folded loosely, posture composed. To her right, Tessa Jordan reviewed a neatly arranged set of files. On the opposite side, Gerard Halverson sat with the legal counsel from the company, a man named Russell Finch, whose briefcase looked older than some of the junior managers in the building. At precisely 2 o'clock, 2 officials from the Federal Aviation Administration entered. One was a tall woman in her 50s with short silver hair wearing a navy suit. The other, a younger man with dark eyes and a measured way of moving, carried a slim laptop. Dr. Monroe, the woman began, shaking her hand. I'm Director Sandra Keating, and this is my associate, Anthony Reyes. We've been assigned to review the incident aboard your flight 3 days ago, as well as the subsequent public statements. Thank you for coming, Laila said. Her voice was calm, almost warm, but beneath it was the steel of someone who knew exactly why this meeting mattered. They took their seats, and the meeting began with procedural introductions. Director Keating then opened a folder of her own. We have the security footage from the gate and cabin, as well as statements from the crew and passengers. Dr. Monroe, we'd like to hear your account directly before we compare it to the record. Laila leaned forward slightly. The footage will show what my account will describe. I boarded in first class, in my assigned seat. I was approached by flight attendant Paige Kincaid, who questioned whether I belonged in that seat. When I requested assistance with my carry-on, she pushed me aside physically. When I objected, she initiated a security call without justification. This was not an isolated misjudgment. This was an expression of bias in uniform. Keating nodded once, expression neutral. And you are the CEO of Apex Meridian Air. Yes, Laila said, which makes it even more critical. If this is how the most visible member of the company can be treated, imagine the passengers without a title or authority to defend them. Gerard cleared his throat, leaning toward the microphones. If I may, the company views this as an unfortunate misunderstanding. Crew members are under pressure to manage seating and passenger conduct. Sometimes they make errors in judgment without malicious intent. Keating's gaze shifted to him. Mr. Halverson, the FAA is not here to determine intent. We are here to determine compliance with federal regulations and assess whether this incident reflects a pattern of discriminatory conduct. The latter can trigger civil penalties and operational oversight. Gerard's mouth closed again. Anthony Reyes spoke for the first time. Dr. Monroe, you've made public statements indicating this was part of a systemic issue within the airline. Can you support that claim with evidence? Yes, Laila said. She signaled to Tessa, who slid a binder across the table. This contains 6 passenger complaints over the last 5 years involving the same crew member. The language is consistent references to passengers not looking the part, being out of place, or making others uncomfortable. 5 of the 6 passengers were people of color. None of these incidents resulted in corrective action. Reyes flipped through a few pages, then looked up. Were these complaints reviewed at the executive level? They were marked as inconclusive at the operations level. Laila said, "They never reached my desk until I requested them myself after this incident." Keating exchanged a glance with Reyes. "That suggests a possible breakdown in escalation protocol. We'll need to review your complaint handling procedures." Laila nodded. "You'll find no resistance from me. I've already initiated an internal audit, approved by the board yesterday." Gerard shifted again. "With respect, the board's decision was not unanimous. Some of us believe Keating cut him off. Mr. Halverson, the FA is not here to mediate your board politics. We are here to assess compliance and determine next steps. If you have relevant operational details, share them. Otherwise, let's keep this focused." For the first time in the meeting, Laila saw Gerard's composure slip, just slightly. Keating turned back to Laila. "One last question for you. What outcome do you want from our review? I want my airline held to the same standard I expect of myself." Laila said, "If systemic bias exists within our operations, I want it identified and eliminated. If accountability is necessary, it should be visible and decisive. The safety of our passengers is measured not only by the condition of the aircraft but by the conduct of those who serve them." The room went still for a moment. Keating closed her folder. "We'll conduct our review and issue a preliminary finding within 2 weeks. Until then, we expect full cooperation from all parties. And, Dr. Monroe, if there are any retaliatory actions taken against witnesses or complainants, notify us immediately. That will trigger a separate enforcement process." "I understand," Laila said. When the meeting ended, Keating and Reyes gathered their materials and left without small talk. The quiet that followed was thick. Gerard stood slowly. "You've just invited federal oversight into our operations. Do you have any idea what that will cost?" Laila looked at him evenly, not as much as doing nothing. He gave a sharp shake of his head and walked out, muttering something to Russell Finch. Tessa waited until they were alone. That was intense. They weren't just listening. They were taking notes like they already suspected more. They should suspect more. Laila said she gathered her papers, and they should find it. As they stepped out into the hallway, Laila felt a strange mixture of pressure and relief. The FAA's involvement would slow things down, add scrutiny, maybe even unsettle the investors. But it would also make it harder for Gerard or anyone else to bury the truth. And if the truth was brought fully into the light, the culture she had been fighting against for years would finally be impossible to ignore. That night, as rain streaked the tall windows of her home, she sat in her study and reviewed the day. She thought of Dane Ellsworth taking the risk to speak up, of passengers who had no voice in these rooms, of the crew members who worked with integrity but had been overshadowed by those who abused their authority. She made herself a promise in the quiet this would not be just another corporate incident that faded from memory. This would be the start of something that outlasted her tenure, her ownership, even her name on the office door. By the time the FAA investigators had left, Gerard Halverson was already in motion. That night, in a dimly lit private dining room at the Crescent Club downtown, he gathered 3 of the board members he knew he could influence. Heavy curtains muffled the sounds of the city outside. Crystal glasses clinked softly as a waiter poured wine. "This is about stability," Gerard was saying, leaning in so his voice stayed low. If Laila continues down this path, federal oversight will slow our operations, spook our investors, and drag us into the press cycle for months. Share value will bleed out. We can't let her run unchecked. One of the members, a man named Victor Lang, swirled his drink. You're suggesting we move to limit her authority. I'm suggesting we prepare a contingency. Gerard replied, if we can frame this as a leadership crisis, we can call for an emergency vote to restructure the executive team. Quietly, they talked for over an hour. By the time Gerard left, he had secured promises, not commitments on paper, but nods, verbal assurances, enough to give him a starting position. Meanwhile, across the city, Laila Monroe was on a video call with an entirely different group of people. Her screen showed the faces of 2 airline executives from other carriers, one union representative, and a respected figure from a major civil rights organization. I've seen this play out before, said the union rep, a woman named Carol Nguyen. When a CEO actually pushes for cultural reform, someone on the inside moves to kill it before it gains traction. Your COO fits the profile. He's already working against me, Laila said, but this time, the public is watching closely. The civil rights leader, Marcus Hill, leaned forward in his frame. Then keep the spotlight on the message, not the man. You're not fighting Gerard. You're fighting the belief that this airline's culture is fine as it is. Laila nodded slowly. I'll need allies on the inside who aren't afraid to speak up publicly, and I'll need evidence that can't be spun away. Carol spoke again. If you can get testimony from other crew or passengers, we can help you protect them legally. I can also reach out to a few senior captains who respect you. They might be willing to stand behind you. It was a start. The next morning, Laila arrived at headquarters early. The corridors were quieter before 8 o'clock, and she liked those minutes when the building felt almost empty. In her office, she found Tessa waiting with a thin envelope. This came by courier, no return address. Inside was a printed transcript of internal crew chat logs from the day of the incident. The messages were time-stamped, casual, but damning. Paige Kincaid had written to another attendant, "First class is gonna be a circus today. You won't believe who they stuck up here." Another line read, "She's not exactly our usual type." Laila stared at the words for a long moment. They were exactly the kind of unfiltered bias she had been describing. Where did this come from? She asked. No idea, Tessa said. But if it's real, we have a problem and an opportunity. Laila set the transcript down carefully. Verify its authenticity, quietly. If it's genuine, it goes to the FAA first. While Tessa got to work, Gerard was already planting seeds with a friendly journalist. In a quiet corner booth of a coffee shop, he leaned across the table to a young man with a recorder. "Off the record," Gerard said, "there's tension at the top of Apex Meridian Air. Our CEO is prioritizing optics over operational stability. Some say she's creating a problem where there isn't one." The journalist nodded, his expression unreadable. Gerard knew how these games worked. If he could paint Laila as a disruptive force to the wrong kind of stability, he could shift the conversation away from bias and toward leadership competency. By noon, the first whispers began appearing online, short posts from anonymous accounts questioning whether Laila's reforms were distracting from safety protocols. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Laila saw them on her lunch break, scrolling through her phone in the cafeteria. She recognized the tactic instantly. distraction through doubt. When Tessa returned mid-afternoon, she brought confirmation. The chat logs are real, pulled from the crew's official communication system. Someone inside wanted you to have them. Then someone inside still cares about the truth, Laila said. She drafted a short email to Director Keating at the FAA attaching internal communication relevant to our ongoing matter. Source confidential for now, but verifiable. Suggest urgent review. She hit send, then sat back. That evening, she received a brief reply, received. This substantially alters the scope of our inquiry. We will follow up. It was the closest thing to a victory she had felt all week. But even in that moment, she knew Gerard would push harder. He had already set his counter-narrative in motion. The real question was how far he was willing to go and whether she could keep the public's attention focused on the real issue before he succeeded in blurring it. As the city lights came on outside her office, Laila made another call to Marcus Hill. "I have something for you," she said. Proof that this was not a misunderstanding. Marcus's voice was steady. Then we moved faster. "Get ready, Laila. Once this hits, the battle will shift into the open." Morning broke with a hard blue sky over the city and a sharper wind than yesterday. In the first hour after sunrise, the story turned. The internal chat logs Tessa verified began circulating in the press. Screenshots flashed on morning shows. Viewers read the words out loud. "She is not our usual type. First class will be a circus today." The lines hit like cold water. They sounded exactly like what they were. Unfiltered contempt in uniform. An alert chimed on Laila's phone. The FAA had expanded its inquiry. The notice used careful phrases. Pattern review, civil rights coordination, possible enforcement. She set the device down and let herself feel the weight for one long breath. Then she stood. There were two fronts now. Federal oversight outside, culture inside. She would meet both in the open. She called Tessa. Bring a media kit to Gate 21. Send invites to crew chiefs and cabin managers at this base. Keep it simple, no spin. Tell them I'm speaking from an aircraft. You want a stage inside a plane? Tessa asked. Yes, a plane is where this began. A plane is where it should turn. By mid-morning, a twin-aisle jet sat at Gate 21 with the cabin powered and lights warm. No passengers, only crew. The air held that quiet pre-flight scent of coffee and recycled coolness. Technicians checked the cameras that would stream the address to training rooms and crew lounges across the network. A few reporters waited behind the jet bridge door with strict instructions. B-roll only until she finished. Laila walked down the jet bridge and stepped through the forward door. The cabin felt like a chapel. Rows of empty seats. A silence that asked for something honest. In the galley, she saw familiar faces. Some were wary, some relieved. Some carried the closed look of people told to say nothing. Clarence Clay Jefferson stood near the service cart, 30 years in the air, calm as a tower. He nodded once. That nod steadied her more than any press release. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Always," he replied. "The crew watches. They want to know if this is real." She moved to the front of the cabin where the camera was framed. She did not use the PA. She did not sit. She faced the lens and the people in the aisles and began. 3 days ago, I was told I did not belong in my own seat. I was moved aside. When I objected, security was called. That story is not new for many travelers. It is new that it happened to me on my own airline. That makes it visible. but it has been true for too long for others." She paused. Let the words settle. Dignity is not a perk. It is not a lounge pass. It is not an upgrade. It is standard equipment. So, today, we begin a change that will be as concrete as any maintenance bulletin. It has a name: Sky Dignity. She spoke the plan clearly. An independent complaint channel with direct oversight. A bind and escalation ladder that could not be closed by a single manager. Mandatory bias and de-escalation training with recurrency checks just like safety drills. Public reporting of outcomes so the world could see not only words but results. She added one more line and felt the cabin lean in. Protection for truth-tellers. No retaliation. Anyone who violates that will be removed from service. A murmur moved through the aisles. It sounded like exhale after holding a breath. Dane Ellsworth stepped forward from a jump seat. He wore his uniform. His voice held the steadiness of a person who has decided and will not move. "I was on the flight. I will testify to what I heard and saw. This is the right thing to do." The camera caught him clearly. Crew in lounges across the country saw his face. In one base, a few pilots stood a little straighter. In another, a junior attendant wiped tears fast and looked away from the people around her. From the rear of the cabin, a manager in a dark suit hurried forward, a folded letter in his hand. Russell Finch walked behind him. Jaw set, Gerard followed. He had chosen his moment. "Ms. Monroe," the manager began, voice thin. "There is an emergency leadership review. Pending that review, you are to suspend public statements and internal directives." Gerard reached for the camera switch. "We are not streaming a coup," he said. Clay stepped in front of the switch and did not touch Gerard but did not move aside. "Sir, you do not want to do that," he said softly. Laila did not raise her voice. She looked at the manager with the letter. "Who authorized this paper?" Gerard answered for him. "Senior executives in consultation with investor advisors. It is necessary to protect the brand." Laila turned to the camera for a heartbeat, then back to Gerard. "The board approved the audit yesterday. The FAA has widened its review. You will not silence the person responsible for cooperating with both. And you will not turn a policy question into a power game in front of the people who actually run these flights." Gerard's eyes flashed. "You cannot run an airline on feelings." "No," she said. "You run it on facts and values in that order. And here are 2 facts. First, your chat logs are now under federal review. Second, the corporate charter allows the CEO to act unilaterally in a reputational emergency that threatens operational trust." She looked toward the forward monitor. "Tessa, bring them in." The cabin screen blinked to life. Marjorie Hale appeared from a conference room, flanked by Beatrice Quinn. Both looked like women who had slept little and decided everything. Marjorie spoke first. "The chair has reviewed the clause Dr. Monroe just cited. We support her authority to implement Sky Dignity immediately. Any attempt to suspend this action is null." Beatrice added 6 words that landed like a latch closing. "The votes are not with you." Gerard stood very still. Russell cleared his throat and tried to gather a lawyer's voice from a dry well. "For the record, we caution against." Laila lifted a hand a fraction. "Counsel will have every chance to review language, but the direction stands." She looked past them to the crew packed in the aisles now. Some wore uniforms. Some wore base jackets and lanyards. Some held phones at their sides, unsure whether to film and deciding they did not need to. The cameras were already rolling. "I am asking for your help," she said. not your silence. If you see conduct that violates the standard we are naming here, report it. If you are unsure, ask a peer. If you need protection, call my office. And when you feel yourself slipping into the old reflex of who looks the part, stop. Ask a different question. Who deserves respect? The answer will be everyone on board. For a long second, no one moved. Then Clay began to clap, once, twice, 3 times. It did not sound like applause. It sounded like agreement. The sound swept the first-class cabin, then the mid-cabin where catering crews had gathered, then the galley where a new hire who had almost quit 2 weeks ago felt something in her chest unclench. Laila looked down at her hands and saw the slightest tremor. She breathed it away. She thought of her mother pouring tea with tired hands and telling her to learn how to build the wings. She thought of a girl in a library turning pages and believing that machines could carry people past their limits. Gerard spoke again, lower now. You will regret making this public. She met his eyes. I will regret nothing about telling the truth. He did not answer. He turned and walked out. Russell following. The manager with the letter folded it back into his pocket and stayed where he was. The streaming crew signaled the feed was closing. The red light on the small camera blinked off. People began to move, talking in low voices. The sacred hush broke and became ordinary life again. Clay moved closer. You did what needed doing. We did, she said. This will be hard. Hard is not the same as hopeless, he said. Then he grinned just a little. Also, you have a whole lot of us. Tessa appeared in the doorway with her tablet. Media requests doubled. FIA called again. Also, 2 captains just emailed to volunteer for the first training cohort. And this, she added with a quick smile, an investor note that says, stay the course. Laila let the wave of information pass through her. The day had turned again. For once it turned toward something that felt like air. She thanked the crew and walked back up the jet bridge. At the gate window, a child pressed both hands to the glass and looked at the plane like it was a living thing. Laila paused beside her for a moment and watched through the clean pane. The jet sat quiet and patient, a machine waiting for people to make a choice about what kind of sky they wanted under it. She had made hers. Tomorrow would bring new angles, new resistance, new noise. There would be depositions and memos and editorials and whispers. There would be meetings where eyes slid away when truth entered. There would be small victories and some losses. She knew all of that in her bones. But for the first time since the push in the galley, she felt the lift begin. Not the clean lift of a plane leaving runway, the rough lift of a culture deciding to rise. She walked toward the terminal doors with a steady stride and a quiet face. Inside, the engines of the world kept turning. Outside, a departing jet rolled to the threshold and waited for clearance. The pilot advanced the throttles. The wings gathered speed. The ground fell away. Tomorrow would be the last part of this chapter. She was ready to write it in the air. The day after the address in the empty cabin began before sunrise. Laila woke from a light sleep, the kind where thoughts never fully shut off. For a minute she lay still and listened to the city, tires on wet pavement, a siren in the distance, the quiet click of her air system cycling. She breathed with it, counting to 4 in and 4 out, the way she had taught herself during hard years when calm was something you built, not something granted. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. A short message from Director Keating at the FAA. preliminary findings indicate failures in complaint escalation and evidence of disparate treatment. Expect formal notice of corrective actions and civil penalties. She read it twice, then once more. Not for the words, but for what they meant. The outside world had seen what she had seen. The pressure would not ease, but now it had direction. By mid-morning, the board met in executive session. The meeting ran short. Marjorie opened with the findings. Beatrice followed with a motion. The vote was decisive. Gerard was removed as chief operating officer and placed on administrative leave pending a separate review of his conduct during the crisis. No one cheered. No one smiled. Old systems do not fall with applause. They stepped back with an exhale and a paper trail. When it was over, Laila sat alone in her office for a long minute. She did not feel triumph. She felt the steadiness that comes after a storm passes and leaves branches on the lawn. There is still clearing to do. There is still weather ahead, but you can see the shape of your house again. Sky Dignity launched that week. The first crew training classes filled in an hour. Captains volunteered to teach de-escalation with the same discipline they brought to checklists. Tessa supervised the independent complaint channel, routing reports to a small team with authority to act. A young analyst in that team surfaced a quiet pattern and a base on the coast. Laila approved measures that afternoon. Feedback loops tightened, reports flowed, answers returned. You could feel it in the building, a different kind of electricity. Paige Kincaid met with HR and legal and then with Laila in a windowed room that looked over the river. No cameras, no audience. Paige sat straight in her chair, a folder in her hands. For a time, they said nothing. The silence felt earned. "I am not here to stage a confession," Paige said. "I am here because I forgot that uniform means service. I forgot that people are not a profile." Laila watched her, searching for evasion, for that old smirk. She did not see it. "You will complete the full program," Laila said. "You will step away from premium cabins for now. If you return, it will be because your record shows changed behavior. We will not stage your return for public consumption. We will not parade you. This is not a performance." Paige nodded. "I understand." Laila believed she did, not because the words were perfect, but because they were not dramatic. They were plain. Plain was a good place to start again. 2 weeks later, the FAA issued its order, fines, yes. More important, a consent agreement that required periodic reporting on complaint handling and training outcomes. The document used dry language. It also carried a simple truth. The agency would watch what Apex Meridian Air watched. The company's word now had to match its numbers. In the months that followed, the measures began to show in the data. Complaints related to bias dropped in a steady curve. Service scores for first class and economy alike rose. Cabin crew retention improved, especially among attendants of color. Bookings trended up as a soft hush moved through the traveling public. People started telling each other that the airline felt different, not perfect, not saccharine, just respectful. You could feel it at the counter. You could feel it in the aisle when you needed help and did not have to wave twice. There were setbacks. A manager tried to bury a report at a regional base. He no longer worked for the airline by week's end. An attendant mocked a training module in a private chat. The screenshot found its way to the team. She sat with Clay for an hour and listened as he told stories from 3 decades in the air. He did not lecture. He described faces. Afterward, she asked to retake the course and then asked to help teach. Dane Ellsworth flew a full schedule while testifying in 2 internal hearings and one external inquiry. Pilots can be a tough audience. He felt the chill from a few who said he should have stayed quiet. He also felt the warmth when older captains clasped his shoulder at the crew door and said 4 words that mattered. You did what mattered. Marcus Hill and Carol Nguyen stayed in the picture without hogging the frame. They knew how to help without making the help the story. When Laila invited them to the first Sky Dignity Review Summit, they brought data, not slogans. The summit ended with a simple pledge on a whiteboard in a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and expo marker. We will not confuse comfort with integrity. Seasons turned. A year passed. On a clear morning with thin autumn light, Laila wheeled a small bag through the terminal at O'Hare and walked straight to the gate for a New York flight. No entourage, no camera. She scanned her boarding pass and stepped into the jet bridge. The air in that narrow tunnel felt familiar, like a pocket between worlds. At the door, a young flight attendant greeted her with a warm smile that was not performative. Welcome aboard, Ms. Monroe. We're glad you're with us today. My name is Maya Torres. If you need anything, please tell me. Thank you, Laila said. She meant it. She settled into 2A and watched the cabin move through its pre-flight rhythm. A man in a rumpled blazer fumbled with a heavy bag. Maya saw it and helped without making him feel like a problem. A woman in a headscarf asked for a seatbelt extender in a low voice. Maya handed it to her the way you hand someone a glass of water. No fuss, just care. Clay walked by on his way to the jump seat. He stopped at her row and leaned slightly, a smile in his eyes. 1 more month, boss. Then I will read books and annoy my grandchildren. You will miss this, she said. I will, he said, but I will leave happy. We built a better cabin than the one we found. After takeoff, the cabin settled into that steady, floating quiet that always made Laila think of her mother. She imagined Evelyn at the kitchen table, tea cooling, saying the same line she had always said, if you want to be in the sky, learn how to build the wings. Laila looked at the people around her and felt the truth of it land again. The wings were not only metal, they were choices. She opened her laptop. A report from Tessa waited on the screen. Sky Dignity. Year 1 summary. She scrolled, fewer complaints, faster responses, training completion above 90%. The words were careful, the tone measured, but between the lines she could hear something else. A company learning how to be what it said it was. She closed the laptop and looked out the window. The clouds below looked like fields. Sunlight slid along the wing. It struck her again how ordinary this moment was. That was the victory. When respect is ordinary, the extraordinary becomes possible. A soft voice brought her back. Ms. Monroe, can I get you anything? Maya stood with a linen napkin over her arm, the posture of someone who took her work seriously. Water, please, Laila said, and thank you for the way you helped in row 3. Maya blinked, surprised and pleased. Thank you for noticing. When the wheels kissed the runway at Kennedy, Laila felt the small forward tug and the heavy breath of the engines reversing. People around her reached for phones and bags. That bustle always charmed her, the way a plane full of strangers shifted from quiet community back into 100 private lives. At the door, as she paused to thank the crew, Maya slipped a small note into her hand. It was folded neatly. She waited until she was in the jet bridge to open it. My mother used to clean planes at night at this airport. She told me stories of how some people treated her. Today, I got to treat people the way she deserved. Thank you for giving us the tools and the permission. Laila stood still with the note between her fingers. The hum of the terminal flowed around her. She felt her throat tighten and let it, just for a second. Then she slid the note into her pocket and walked on. Outside security. A child pressed both hands to the glass and watched a departing jet as if it were a bright animal. Laila stood beside the child for a moment and watched with her. When the plane lifted and the ground fell away, the child laughed softly without looking away. Laila smiled. Then she turned toward the city and the work waiting in it. In the end, the story was simple. A push in a galley, a refusal to be small, a decision to make dignity standard equipment. The rest was repetition. Choices repeated until a pattern formed that looked like respect. On the sidewalk outside the terminal, the air smelled of jet fuel and rain. She closed her eyes and drew a breath that filled her lungs all the way and did not stop halfway out of habit. The exhale left her steady. She began to walk. Dignity does not travel as a privilege, she thought. On this airline it flies with every passenger, every day. A shove in a galley could have become just another apology and a voucher. Instead, it became a line in the sand. Dr. Laila Monroe chose the harder path. She answered contempt with clarity. She turned a private insult into a public standard. Sky Dignity was not a slogan. It was a promise that respect would be as routine as a safety check and as visible as a wing in sunlight. Remember the people who made that promise real. Dane Ellsworth, who told the truth when silence would have been easier. Clarence Clay Jefferson, whose steady hands guided a new generation toward better habits. Maya Torres, who served without judgment and proved that kindness is a skill. And remember the unseen millions who have been told they do not look the part. Their stories live in every aisle. We do not tell this to shame a single person. We tell it to name a pattern and to end it. Love the people who do the work right. Honor those who speak up. Refuse the small cuts of everyday bias. The world we board is the world we land in. Let it be one where dignity is not rare, not conditional, not for sale. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. Share it with someone who needs courage for their next flight or their next meeting. Like the video, share it, and subscribe so you are here for the journeys ahead. The next story is already on the runway.